Hey everybody, Koricon here, and we're going to be doing spoiler review discussion kind of videos for the episodes of Breathe. Now, I did a spoiler-free review for episodes 1 through 4. I'll have a link to it in the description below, but go check that out if you have not seen the show yet. These videos are for those that have seen the show. It is full of spoilers, a ton of spoilers. By the time you get to episode 4, you are not going to want to know what happens if you haven't seen it. So go watch the show first, then come back here, and we'll have a cool discussion. Just go over things that I noticed. It's more of a video to kind of nerd out and talk about different aspects, things like little details that we can't get into in a spoiler-free atmosphere. And I think each episode has enough stuff to talk about that we would have a decent video about it. And I wanted you guys to be included in the conversation. And so I want your comments in the description below of things you may have noticed, things I might have missed, or your opinions and thoughts on what I have to say about it. Now, this video is not sponsored by Amazon or Breathe, the show. However, I did get a free Amazon Prime account because of Madhavan. So those of you that have seen my Twitter and stuff like that, and I did a video about this before the show came out, but Madhavan had said some really nice things about me and on Twitter, and one of the things that he offered was to get me an Amazon Prime account so I could watch the show. And sure enough, he did have Amazon contact me, and they gave me a 1-year subscription to Amazon Prime so I could watch the show, which was awesome. I really appreciate that. That does not affect my reviews in any way. It was very nice of him to do that. I really appreciate it. He's a great guy. I loved our little conversations that we've had. As you guys know, I always give my honest opinion, and I just really want to talk about it. I thought the show was really good, and that's what this is. Now, I am going to be promoting the Stardust app. For those of you that don't know what it is, I'm going to have a thing at the end of the video to talk about that. But I like using it, and I thought it would be fun to include some of your guys' reactions from Stardust into some of my videos. So check out that little thing that's going to be at the end of the video to get more information on that. So let's get into Breathe, episode 1, called The Promise. Now, one of the things about all of these episodes is the titles. Like this one is called The Promise, which we kind of know what that is just because of the trailer. Basically, he is promising to his son that, in his own mind, that he won't let him die. But kind of what we don't know is he's also promising his wife, who had died previously, like a while ago. We don't really know too much about that at this point. So the title for this one is kind of obvious. But the other titles for the other shows don't give anything away. And neither do the thumbnails on Amazon Prime. And I really like that. Now, there's some shows that I've seen, and I've seen this a lot, where the thumbnail for the show, if you're watching it online, it gives away way too much. To where you could I can look at the thumbnail and pretty much guess where that scene happens in the show and maybe what's going on, and it could give me a clue of figuring things out. Now, that could just be me. Like some of you guys know, when I watch trailers, I can pretty much tell you where certain scenes are going to happen in the movie. And if the trailer gives away a little too much, I can pretty much tell you what the entire movie is going to be. So I like the fact that the thumbnails and the titles of the show don't give away anything. You can't read the titles and be like, oh, I guess this is the moment when so-and-so and something happens. So they don't do that. But then when you're done with the show, you look at the title and you're like, oh, I see what you did there. And I really like that. Also, for all of these episodes, I liked the titles, the intro titles. The music and the way that the title screen looks for the opening credits, I really like that. up there with some of their other shows. Like Dexter had a great one, Daredevil. There's a lot of shows in the past 5 to 10 years that have really taken pride in how their opening credit sequence is. Because you've got a lot of shows that they don't even have much of an opening sequence. Like I've seen some shows, they just have maybe 2 notes or 1 note and then the title of the show, and that's it. But I think it kind of helps get you ready. Like I remember shows from the 90s and the 80s where the theme song and the opening credit sequence was really important. And a lot of times you remember that more than you do the show after a while. Like, I remember the opening of DuckTales. DuckTales, tales of daring, do bad and good DuckTales. Can't get that song out of your head. And I remember specifics of certain episodes, but that opening credit sequence just stuck with me. So I love the title sequence for the opening credits, and I watch it for every episode. Like, you have an option to skip past the opening credits, but I would watch them every time just because it helps, get my excitement up, gives me a good amount of time to kind of listen to the music and get ready for the episode. And each episode also has a quick little intro before the title sequence. It's a strategy and form of storytelling that's used in all kinds of entertainment. Books, plays, movies, TV shows. Basically anything that tells you a story, they try and grab your attention right in the beginning. And then they use that interest to pull you along through the rest of the story. Because the middle of a story can kind of slow down as they're getting into character development, exposition. And so they want that opening to kind of hold you there even during the slow moments that have to be there. And they do a good job with that. Every episode has a really good opening boom, and the first episode had the best. The other ones were good intros, like they grab you, but I don't think any of them have the weight of the beginning of the first episode, which makes sense because you need that one to be the greatest to get people like really interested in the entire series. So the opening short piece needs to keep you excited for all 8 episodes, where the opening for every episode really just needs to hold your attention for that 40 minutes. And they nailed it on this first episode. So in the first episode, you have this great shot of a kind of a living room with a cell phone on a stand on a table.
Mama? Papa?
And then she records this suicide note, wraps her legs, wraps her arms, wraps cellophane around, first she wraps cellophane around her head, then she wraps her arms. It would be kind of weird and hard to wrap your arms and then put cellophane. So she wrapped cellophane around her head, wrapped her arms, and forced herself to suffocate. The actress did a really good job of, playing that, where you're like, oh my gosh, like this girl can't breathe. And then she kind of falls over and kicks the table and the cell phone falls down. So you're seeing her legs, which was great because I think that has a stronger impact. Now, you don't want to show her face as she's suffocating. That would be a little too horrific and would set a different tone for the show that the show doesn't have. Having the camera fall and show her legs kind of adds a mystery of like, there is something going on right off a camera that you can't see, but it's there. And Hitchcock used that a lot. Hitchcock movies didn't have a lot of violence. It had the insinuation of violence, where right before the violent act happens, it cuts away, or you hear certain sounds, but you don't actually see the violence. And what happens is your brain fills in those empty spots with its own imagery. And that can make things more horrific or more suspenseful than actually showing it on camera. One of the best examples of that, and I know this is going to sound a little weird, I'm not comparing this movie to the show, but this movie did this very well, is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So if you watch the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, when it came out in the 70s, people were just disgusted by this movie. They were like, oh, the movie is so gross and disgusting and horrific. They didn't use much blood, but they did a great job of insinuating the violence and just moving camera. And then your brain fills in the rest and makes it more horrific than it really was. So you hear a lot of people talk about Texas Chainsaw Massacre being like one of the most violent movies. And it wasn't. If you actually watch it, it's not that violent. It's scary. It's horrific. And they do that in this show, where they don't show a lot of the violence, but they insinuate it, or they move away right before something happens, or they show it from a different point of view, especially from Madhavan's point of view, or from the point of view of the victim. So you're not watching the victim die, but you feel like you're in it and you're experiencing it because you're seeing, the camera is showing it from their point of view. And that's a great way of kind of insinuating the violence, because you're not watching her suffocate. You're not seeing her eyes and seeing her going like, it's not that kind of horrific sequence. Instead, you're seeing the camera with the cellophane in front. So everything is blurry and you're to the side. The camera's on the side and you see a guy walk into camera and walk out the door and close the door just a bit, but leaves a gap. And then the camera is moving and then doesn't move and you hear no sound. That is so creepy. I loved it. I loved that intro, and it really did. It grabbed you, and it's going to hold you for 8 episodes. Now that wraps into the twist in the 4th episode, which we'll get into when we talk about the 4th episode. But if you haven't seen those yet, I don't want to talk about that. I just want to concentrate on this 1st episode, especially if, you know, people are watching this right after they see the 1st episode, but before they see 2, 3, and 4. I loved how that came full circle for the first half of the 1st series or season. After the opening credits, you get a 4 months earlier. A lot of times I don't like the, 2 days earlier, 3 months earlier, 1 year earlier. I don't want my intro grab you scene to be something that happened in the future, because a lot of times I can figure out what's going to happen because I have this nugget of information that happens 4 months later, and then as we approach that time, it allows me to figure things out before it happens, and then that can kind of ruin the story sometimes. Now, it didn't ruin it in this movie, but once the sequence started, I was like, oh, we're there, we're full circle. But they did something with it that changed it and made it fresh. A lot of movies and TV shows that do that kind of, here's a future nugget, now we go to the past to see what happened. It ends up being the exact same sequence. And so you're able to guess, or you're expecting it. And then when it happens, it's almost a little boring because you've already seen it. You saw it at the beginning of the story. So I really like the fact that they changed it up and you got to see more information of the same scene. That really had a great impact, and it didn't ruin the opening, and it wasn't boring when it hit. Now that we're 4 months earlier, we start getting into our characterization of part of the story, where we have to be introduced to our characters, we have to get some exposition, and we have to kind of be slowly pulled into how everybody is going to interact with each other. Now, our two main characters, Madhavan's character, which is Danny, Kabir is the cop, who's played by Amit. They're separate. They have two different storylines. Sometimes that can be difficult because you're jumping between two very different stories that don't feel connected until you get to the point where they meet. So it feels like two segregated storylines that are going like this, and then right there they kind of come together again. When you do a story like that, if your two storylines don't run in parallel with each other close enough, if they're too far apart, your tone change between the character sequences is too great and it can pull you out of the story. One of the things they did to fix that, which I thought was great writing but also really convenient, Kabir had a daughter who had died at a young age. And Danny has a son who's at a young age that has cystic fibrosis, can't really breathe, and he's dying. He needs a transplant. So both characters had a young child that's either in danger or had already died. And that kind of brings them closer together so their stories are more parallel, where you can almost see where Madhavan's character might go if his son dies, because you see the despair and alcoholism and anger, all of that stuff, depression that Kabir is going through after losing a child. So it does give the tone an easy move back and forth between our characters. However, it was kind of hard to see where things were going with them. You knew they were going to meet at some point because Kabir's a cop. Danny is doing violent acts that needs to be stopped. So eventually they're going to meet each other. But their storylines were very different. Now, Madhavan had lost his wife. She had died. Kabir has a wife that they're going through a divorce after the death of their daughter. The stress between them, even though his wife was trying to keep the relationship together, his despair and depression and alcoholism really pushed her away and kind of pulled them apart. That was another thing that kind of held the two characters paralleled, was because the wife's relationships were different but also very impactful, where Danny doesn't have his wife anymore and he's dealing with that death. Kabir is dealing with having a wife but pushing her away. So the children and the wives both kind of reflect both characters, but in very different ways. I liked that, but it was very convenient that both characters had very similar problems or relationships, emotions, but I didn't mind. I didn't care the convenience of the story. I liked the reflection off each character, especially since you're going to be with these two characters for a really long time doing the long format of a story like this, running 8 episodes. You kind of need them to be close paralleled, especially during these moments where we have like 3 or 4 episodes where they don't interact with each other at all. And so you've got to keep them somewhat close and interesting and similar tone. Danny is a very loving father. You can tell that his character is desperately trying to hold on to moments because his son is dying from cystic fibrosis. The kid ends up having an attack. They go to the hospital and they find out he only has 6 more months to live. 5 or 6 months. They had known about it for a year, and his son was on a transplant list for a year. But now he only has 6 months to live, and he's 4th in line on the transplant list. But they introduced the problem of his son has a rare blood type, which is AB negative. So he can't accept blood from other blood types. Like if you're an O positive, you're a universal donor. But if you're an O negative, you're a universal taker. So an O positive can take other O positives, and those are not rare. But an O negative can pretty much take anybody's blood and is perfectly fine. But an AB negative has to have another AB negative. They can't take O positive. They can't take anything else. Has to be AB negative. And there's only a handful of AB negative people that are donors. Now, when I first heard that, I was like, well, that's kind of convenient. There's only 5 people in the immediate area, in anywhere close that are donors. There would be more, realistically. People don't want to donate. There's things with their religion, or, they see it as a violation of the body. And also on Danny's side, he has one kind of quick sequence where someone else in the hospital, their father is now in a coma, he's brain dead, and he's trying to convince them to donate the organs. Even though his son wouldn't be a match to get any of them, he was trying to convince them that his organs could save a lot of lives. And they thought it was horrible that he even, asked them to do that. They would never do that because he could come awake at any moment, which he won't. He's brain dead. There's nothing. He's just a shell that's with an air breather. There's nothing up there. He's not waking up. Even if he does wake up, he's just going to be a vegetable with the eyes moving, and that's it. Using the cultural stigma of being a donor mixed with the AB negative aspect of the story made it believable and realistic that there would only be a handful of people that could be a match for his son, which makes things even more desperate. And that adds along with Danny's character of how desperate he is becoming. Although that helped his character and making things believable of why he made the decisions that he ends up making, I think the impact of the decision he ultimately moves to was diminished a little bit by the fact that they just mentioned very quickly that his son had been on the donor list for 1 year. Because we're introduced to these characters fairly quickly. We get scenes with him being a father with the son, and you're emotionally attached a bit. And then he's got 6 months to live. But they just quickly mention that 1 year. Where if they had some more sequences of, characterization being pulled throughout that year, then the emotional impact of the son having an attack and only given 6 more months would be greater and would service more of why Danny makes the decisions he ends up making. So I think the fact that it's just a very quick, he's been on it for 1 year, kind of took away a little bit of his decision, but you still go along with it and you understand it because of all of these other things that are adding to his desperation. And of course the scene that's in the trailer where he's talking with his son, he was reading him a story. The son's got a breather to help him breathe, and he looks up at his dad and he says, Dad, I don't want to die. You're like, oh.
Dada, I don't want to die.
The kid did such a good job in that scene, and you can see Madhavan's face just sink, and he's like heartbroken. Very powerful scene, and that added a lot to his decision as well. But if that scene didn't work, I think it would have taken away a lot. One of the things I mentioned in my spoiler-free review is a lot of the side characters were also good actors, which you don't get a lot. There's a lot of movies where the side characters are just okay actors, or they're not very good actors, or they're overacting, being almost soap opera kind of very over-the-top emotional characters, but you end up just kind of liking them and they grow on you by the end of the movie. With this show, you can't do that because you have a lot of scenes where the side characters have to carry the scene because Madhavan and Amit aren't in it at all. So your side characters have to hold the scene together, and they have to be good actors to pull that off. So they did a good job of casting all of the side characters to be either decent or really good actors. There were only a couple of people that I thought were over the top emotional, but it wasn't too distracting, and they weren't in the show that much. So you're like, ooh, that's a little too over the top. But it would be very quick, and then you go back to good acting again. I mentioned the music in the spoiler-free review, so I'm not going to get into it too much in here. But I just kind of wanted to mention again that the music did a good job of accentuating the tone that's going on without overpowering it or becoming too loud or aggressive in the music. So the music did a good job of allowing you to pull in the visual story aspect. But also the director did a good job of knowing when to use silence, which a lot of directors either don't use at all and they try and put music in every scene, or they use silence too much to where it's not effective. And I think they found a good balance of when to use music and when to use silence or just the sounds of what's going on in the background. I wanted to talk about some of the camera work. The camera movements, the focus, the placement of the cameras, that kind of thing. I noticed about 5 distinct styles that the director used in the first episode. One of them, the first one, would be some pretty interesting establishing shots. Some of them, though, seemed artistic, or the director just wanted to try something, or the cinematographer was like, ooh, let's try this. And they did that a lot for the establishing shots and some of the exposition scenes in the first episode, but they did tone down and become more consistent with their camera work in the rest of the episodes. So in the first episode, you had things like a camera right on the top of the car with the siren, and the car is moving, which I've seen before. One of the more famous uses of that camera shot, at least in the United States, was a TV show in the 60s and 70s called Police Squad.
Police Squad in color.
So that shot kind of pulled me out a little bit, but not much. I mean, it was more of like, oh, I've seen that before. Kind of weird because I associate it with a comedy, but it still worked. It worked as an establishing shot. It was just different, and I didn't think it matched the tone of the show. They also had cameras mounted on the side of the car, or they would have it mounted on something that was moving. And then they also had some interesting establishing shots, like they're in the bathroom and the camera is basically on the floor with an upshot of them at the urinal, which was an odd shot, but it was very short. And then they went quickly back to a regular, normal, dramatic camera work of somewhat close-ups of exposition scenes. So it wasn't bad. It was just a little odd where you're like, this is an interesting decision, and then they go back again. Another technique they used, the second one I noticed, was inserting the audience as a voyeur of the sequence. And the way that you do that is you have objects in the foreground. So you'll have things like the side of a door frame, or a plant, or an object of something that's out of focus, that's really close to the camera, and then you're seeing the sequence that's going on that's in focus with our characters. And that's used a lot as a audience voyeur sequence. They didn't use that too much, but it was, again, you want to be careful when you use those kind of sequences. Because if you don't use it all the time, then you're like, Why am I a voyeur of this scene but nothing else? So I would have preferred they didn't do those shots, just because you're not utilizing it all the time, or you're not utilizing it as trying to show a character that is being a voyeur and you're just seeing it from their point of view. It's just, hey, you're a voyeur for this scene, but none of the others. So it wasn't a bad shot. It looked like a good shot. It was cinematically filmed well. I just think the style of that voyeur tactic didn't work for me because it wasn't utilized that much. The third style that I noticed was used as giving some clean exposition, where the directing did not overshadow the information that you're getting. You don't want sequences or scenes to look too artistic or complicated camera-wise if you're giving exposition, because then the audience gets distracted and doesn't pick up all of the information that the story is trying to give you. So you have to give a good, clean, non-artistic, it's kind of boring camera work, but you need it for the exposition sequences. And they used that properly.
Social media पे viral हो गया ये video. कबीर, why can't you go by the books?
मालवण गुरु कोई संत आदमी नहीं है सर, आप जानते हो.
I have not finished yet.
Nothing over the top or too interesting about those shots. It just worked really well and allowed the viewer to absorb all of that exposition, character development, and story aspects. The fourth style I noticed was one I already mentioned, which was the character's point of view. So not just the one with the cellophane of the girl dying at the beginning, but also a sequence in a hospital where you're seeing it from Madhavan's point of view. But then they cut out of the first-person view and show a third-person view when he's taking pictures of the donor list. When he's walking through the hospital and he's trying to avoid the nurses at night and sneaking around, they do the first-person point of view, which was okay. But I think a third-person point of view would have worked just fine, especially since you're jumping between a first-person and a third-person. A lot of times when you're doing a sequence, you kind of want to stay consistent with your camera styles. But it wasn't bad or anything like that. I just noticed it, and it was a little odd in my own head of, we're first person, okay, great, but why were we third person earlier, and why are we third person after? It's just this one scene that was a single shot, which I did like the fact that it was a single shot. I like less edits. I like really long, continuous shots. So he used the first person point of view to be able to do that one take. But it was different than the other camera work that was done for the entire sequence. The fifth style that I noticed was a character's frame of mind, which at first threw me off a little bit in the camera work for the scenes, but then it dawned on me what the director was going for, and it made a lot of sense, and then I really enjoyed it. But until I realized it, it pulled me out of the scene, but then as soon as I realized it, I was really engaged. Now, the scene that I'm talking about that used it really well the first time was between Kabir and his wife, where they're having the argument, and she's basically packing up her stuff and she's going to move out. So they're separating, but they haven't gotten the divorce yet. When the camera is on his wife, it's very stable. It's very calm. You can tell that she's done with this whole situation with him, that she's packing her stuff. She's become okay in her own mind that she can't do anything with him. And so she has a very calm mind about it, very logical. She wants to sell the house and she wants to move on, but he doesn't. And then from his sequences, when the camera's on him, he's drunk, he's belligerent, he's angry, and the camera is a floating handheld, and it's moving around as it watches him. And that reflects his frame of mind of being drunk and chaotic and depressed and angry. And so when it's on him, the camera's doing this, almost like the camera that can't be contained, and the person holding the camera is having a hard time keeping it stable. But they don't do the shaky cam. Shaky cam is where you slap the side of the camera to make it look like, you know, really shaky, chaotic camera work. This was more of a floating cam, and it didn't move smoothly. It jumped around a bit, but not so much to where it was giving me a headache or anything. It really was used to show his frame of mind. So on him, it's doing this, and then on her, it's really stable, and then it goes back to him, and it's this, and her, and it's stable. So when it first started doing that, I was like, oh, why are you changing the camera styles, the shooting styles between two characters that you're bouncing back and forth fairly quickly? But then it dawned on me, it's showing their frame of mind. And then I got really into it.
और वैसे भी कोई रेजिडेंशियल बायर ये घर खरीदने से रहा।
क्यों? क्या प्रॉब्लम है इस घर में? हाँ? बाकी घरों में लोग मरते नहीं हैं क्या?
कबीर, please.
He utilizes that later on in the show as well. When, like Madhavan, when he's going into the hospital, you can tell that he's really determined and accepting of what he is about to do. And so the camera work is kind of calm around him as he's going through the hospital. But in other times, like when he's talking with his son and it's really sad, you have extreme kind of close-ups on their faces so you can see the acting. I was impressed with what the frame of mind aspects of those styles of sequences, especially once it dawned on me what he was doing. At least that's what I think he's doing. If I'm wrong, director, please tell me. The episode ends with him promising to do whatever it takes to save his son, and that is the title of the story, The Promise. And that's what I liked about the titles in the shows that I said earlier, that they don't give away anything story-wise, but by the end of the episode, you're like, oh, that's what the title is referencing. So I loved that. But that's episode 1. I'd love you to comment below and let me know your thoughts on this episode. What did you notice? What do you think about my opinions on what I noticed? Am I wrong about something? What did you like that I was right about? Or what did I not notice that you want to talk about? And let's get a nice conversation, a discussion going on about episode 1. But let's not get into the other episodes. I'm going to be doing spoiler videos for episodes 2, 3, and 4, and then eventually 5, 6, 7, and 8 when they come out. Episode 5 is coming up on the 3rd, which is Saturday. Now, I'm not going to be able to get to 5 by the time 5 starts. My life has been pretty chaotic this week, and tomorrow I'm not going to have time to film episode 2 because I need to get my car fixed, and I'm trying to get to Padmavat tomorrow night, which is my 3rd attempt in trying to see it. And so I'm not going to have any time to film tomorrow, but I will be getting episodes 2, 3, 4, and 5 out as soon as possible so that I'm set up to be able to do episodes 6, 7, and 8 at least the next day of when the show comes out. So stay tuned for those. And I've got links in the description below for all of the information that I talked about, like Madhavan's tweet or the Stardust app, but also all of my social medias, Discord server, the Patreon, I started making GIFs. That was more of just a little fun thing that I was doing. So there's some silly GIFs in my little channel on Giphy.com if you want to look at some really silly GIFs. That's down there. But check out the description. There's a bunch of stuff. If you got a question about it, it's probably down there. And here is the information on that Stardust app. I would really like to see you guys pop on there if you're interested, and make sure to tag me in some reactions once I get them I will try and integrate some of them into my videos. So you can basically see yourself in the video. That would be great. And I'm interested in what your opinions are on those reactions. Comment below and let me know. Like, share, subscribe, and tell your friends. And I'll see you in the next episode. Quick promotion, everybody. I'm having fun using the Stardust app, which allows you to make up to a 30-second reaction to movies and TV shows. And I'd love to see your reactions and put them in my videos. If you're interested in that, download the Stardust app. I've got a link to it in the description below. And make sure to follow Koricon. And whenever you make a reaction, make sure that you tag Koricon so that I get notified and can see it. Whenever I make a reaction video or a movie review and I see your video, I will take clips from it and put them in my video. If you're a YouTuber, make sure to put your YouTube channel name on your reaction if you want free promotion. And if you're a fan of my channel and just want to be in there, great. So tag me on your reactions. And to be totally transparent and honest with you guys, when you download the Stardust app, the first person that you follow gets credit for the download. So if you want to follow me and give me credit, make sure that you follow me first. If you want to give your favorite YouTuber a credit, make sure that you follow them first. But either way, make sure that you follow me at some point and tag me in your reactions so I can get them in the videos.